Good morning, everybody. Uh, First, I'd like to say sorry for the loss of the Indian cricket team yesterday. Although we were very hopeful that we'll win against Pakistan, but we lost. But that's okay. That's part of the game. So today I'll be presenting something slightly off the track, and that will be what the tests that we are conducting in our lab, and what new tests can be conducted, and what are the facilities that are available as core services in the lab. And this series will be for the whole Department of Molecular and Cellular Medicine, and each faculty will be presenting on subsequent Mondays about the core facilities and the tests they are providing. So my lab focuses on genomics and metagenomics. Genomes are basically the total set of genes present in an individual, and metagenome is a total aggregate of all the genomes present in a given place. Particularly, this is being used for microbiota, which is consolidated on skin surface, gut, or in the pinna or in the nares. So the microbiota is compared considering it as a metagenome rather than individual genomes. Of course, individually cultured microbes can be analyzed for their respective genomes. So brief outline. So I'll be providing first mentioning about the lab services, the tests currently running, and new tests that are there, the core facilities. So before I start, just a basic touch up on what the basis of all this genomics and metagenomics is, and that is what has been considered a central dogma of genetics. And that is that DNA is the source of all the genetic information, which is transcribed into RNA, which is then translated into proteins. And these proteins bring about what is called as the phenotype, or the effect that we see. Now, this central dogma was modified a few decades back with the discovery of RNA-based genetic information in viruses and other organisms. And then RNA is anyway again transcribed back, reverse transcribed to DNA, and then again the formation of protein synthesizing RNAs, proteins, and the subsequent phenotypes. So this lower figure actually shows that the DNA is constituted of 4 bases: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. And just these 4 bases in various combinations form the whole genome. This DNA is then read by what is called as the DNA polymerase, because it is polymerizing chains of RNA. And the bases slightly change on the RNA, but the information that is present on the DNA is conserved. And this is then transcribed, translated into proteins on the ribosomes. So each amino acid is coming from a combination of 3 bases, which is called a codon. So this information some of you may be knowing, for some of you it may be new, but then each amino acid has 3 bases. Any variation in these 3 bases can lead to a modification in the kind and the type of the amino acid that is being synthesized. This depends on the position of these bases. For example, in CAA, the last base is generally not considered that important. In very few cases where this base changes because of misactivity of the DNA polymerase, you may get a different amino acid, but generally the second and the first base are the ones which are most important. So when the polymerase is working, it can commit mistakes. It's a chemical process, and mismatches can happen. And I will be using the acronyms. The A, G, C, or T, these 4 bases, can be replaced by any of the other bases depending on what kind of mistake is occurring. And the changes between the purines, which are the adenine and the guanine, are called transitions, and the thymine and the cytosine are called pyrimidines. So in a change in the similar type of base is called transition. A change in a different type of molecular setup, that is between purine and pyrimidine, is called a transversion. So these 2 changes, transitions and transversions, they occur. So if we look at this in a normal situation, each 3 base set is called a codon. And if this particular set of DNA codes for cysteine, tyrosine, histidine, alanine, valine in a normal circumstance, a simple change in or a simple insertion by the polymerase, a simple base addition, may lead to the change in the combination of bases that are being read as a codon. Now this changes the cysteine, tyrosine, histidine, alanine to cysteine, leucine, proline, valine. That means the structure of the protein completely changes in certain areas. This can also happen if the polymerase misses to put a base in the right place, and this is called a base deletion, where a base is missing, and when the base is missing, again the codon sequence changes, and this again leads to a different combination of amino acids being translated eventually, leading to a different kind of a protein that was actually intended as coded by the DNA. There are mutations which lead to stop codons, which means insertion of a base leads to a stop codon, because you have to stop the polymerase, otherwise it will continue to synthesize non-stop. We want it to stop at each after a transcription of each gene. So if that insertion leads to a stop codon, insertion of a base leads to a establishment of a stop codon on the RNA is terminated premature. So the protein is not synthesized fully, and again there is a loss of expression of the gene or loss of protein in the system. So just a simple single base variation can bring about significant effects on the phenotype, biochemistry, and the metabolism. And these are generally called as SNPs. Now, last week, Dr. Alec actually very beautifully described the difference between the whole genome level analysis and targeted analysis. When we are looking at these SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, because it's a single base change that occurs, then we are looking at what is called as a targeted. We are looking very specifically, we should already know what we are looking at. We just cannot take a DNA from a sample and say that, okay, we want to find out SNPs. It is very difficult to do that. We have to know firsthand. To know that firsthand, we have to perform a whole genome analysis in a large number of population, which has been defined by the ENCODE guidelines of the European Molecular Biology Lab, an equivalent of NIH in US. And according to these guidelines, we need at least 1,000 samples in the whole genome of the whole genome to be analyzed before we can determine, or we can say for sure that, okay, an SNP exists. So then there are SNPs and then there are SNVs. SNVs are single nucleotide variants, and these are slightly different from SNPs, because SNPs are the aberrations which are present in a population, whereas individuals can also have variations or polymorphic variations, which are called single nucleotide variations. These are called private mutations also, and these are not very well characterized, but many times they give rise to what are called as idiopathic presentations. The frequency of the occurrence of these is actually what determines whether it is called the SNP or the SNV. So these are the tests that we have been conducting since last 10 years, of which the IL-28 and ITPA, which were done for HCV in HCV patients, have been stopped after the new generation of drug has come in. But these tests have been performed regularly, and I'll just go through them. The first is, of course, the prothrombotic panel. Of course, we are not running this as a panel. Very few tests are done as a panel. If you can see here, we have done only 45 tests so far, but rests have been distributed between MTHFR, prothrombin, and factor V. So these tests are done to assess if there is a genetic factor involved in the prothrombic condition that is present, which may be present in portal vein thrombosis or even in Budd-Chiari also. So for this, we need whole blood in EDTA vacutainer. We separate the cells and the plasma, and from the cells the DNA is isolated, and the turnaround time for the results is about 7 days. This is an in-house RT-PCR based test, but because RT-PCR is dysfunctional for last 1 year and because of some administrative issues has not been repaired, this test is not being conducted currently. Then there is a pancreatitis panel. Of course, we have not done so far all the 3 genes simultaneously, but PRSS1, protease serine 1, the cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator, and the SPINK. These are involved in regulation of trypsin release and modulation. And amongst these, of course, pancreatitis may occur because of CASR modification, CTRC modification, or PRSS2 modifications, but these tests have not been established yet. There is a potential for these tests depending upon the number and the turnover of the patients. Other tests that are being conducted are hemochromatosis, for which we are performing aberrations present in the high Fe2 or high iron, high ferrous gene. This protein actually binds to the transferrin receptor 1 or transferrin receptor 2 and regulates the iron transport across the cell membrane. The other is the Janus kinase or the JAK2, which is involved in the JAK-STAT signaling. Again, we are performing only one test, but then there are multiple tests depending upon the phosphorylation defects, because both JAK and STAT, the receptor STAT and the downstream modulator, the downstream signaling transducer JAK, they function and signal differentially depending upon the phosphorylation that is taking place. So phosphorylation analysis is a different ball game altogether, and that needs to be done. Just performing JAK2 is not going to give results always. Then we are performing some tests for the TPMT gene, which is the thiopurine S-methyltransferase, and this is involved in metabolism of the thiopurine drugs, which are given for immune suppression and even post-transplant. And there are these three mutations that we are analyzing: TPMT2, 3B, and 3C, depending on the gene, on the exon that they are present. Individually, 2, 3B, and 3C, each one of these is giving an intermediate defect, but when in combination, the defect becomes severe. The problem is that if this drug is not metabolized, it is converted into intermediate form, which can go and inhibit the amino acid synthesis or even get integrated into the DNA, causing the interruption in the signaling processes. PNPLA3, everybody knows this. This is a triglyceride hydrolysis enzyme, and aberration in this leads to accumulation of triglycerides and is a very well-known factor for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We are also performing tests for ATP7B, which is required for copper movement across the cells. And we are currently performing about 5 commonly known mutations for this. Although, according to a large database present at University of Alberta, there are more than 1,200 disease-causing variants, which includes insertions, deletions, or substitutions of bases, as I explained earlier. And to perform this, we need a large panel to actually analyze in a disease patient what exactly the prototype is, what exactly the factor responsible for this is. For the disconjugated bilirubin assimilation or the Gilbert syndrome, we are performing the Tata box. The Tata box is present on the UGT1A1 gene, which is in the promoter region, and there are multiple start sites for this gene, giving rise to different proteins with having different phenotypic effects. What we are conducting is on the A1 region, but we are not performing on the other regions. This can be expanded because many times the clinical report is that it's a Gilbert syndrome, but we are finding the test to be wild type. Wild type means that there is no aberration, and this is primarily because this particular A1 SNP that we are looking at is not mutated, but it can have mutations anywhere else. Another common feature that we have come across is a CAT. C is the 3 amino acids, a codon insertion before this Tata box, and this insertion actually leads to an aberration in the kind of protein that is being synthesized. We are not reporting this currently. But with the clearance, we can probably start reporting this also. And this is present in about 5 to 10% of cases that we have seen so far. Some new tests that we have established is for cholesterol ester storage disease, for poor cholesterol esters and triglyceride metabolism, galactosemia, and for NAFLD, where SAM50 and PAVB have been also introduced. Now, these are done on a sequencing basis. The samples are sent out. So we have kept a turnaround time of about 15 days, although the results come to us within 10 days, and as soon as they come, we report it. But just in case there is a delay in transport or assessment of the or the analysis, we have kept this extra time for this. If these tests are conducted in-house, then of course the turnaround time will be much reduced. The genetics lab has so far earned a revenue of about 5 crores for ILBS. And of course, all these tests have been done without claiming any revenue. Sir, हौसला अफजाई के लिए ताली बजा सकते हैं, please. Thank you. So the core facilities present in the lab are about metagenomics and microgenomics. Now, microgenomics is a very new term, and this includes analysis of single cell genomes and single cell transcriptomes. Although this is just a subset of genomic analysis, and I don't think it should be kept separately, because in any way we are performing genomic analysis. So the core strength of the lab is assessment of microbiota. It does not depend which kind of microbiota or from which site you are capturing. The analysis is done on 16S RNA or at whole genome level, depending upon what kind of analysis is required. Then their classification and distribution and diversity analysis is also available. The lab is also fully equipped with the transcriptome analysis, and we have established transcriptome analysis for biopsy samples, as well as for PBMC samples, the whole blood or even isolated cell types. The lab also is fully functional and capable of bioinformatic analysis of various types, which includes analyzing microbial diversity, gene expression variation, transcript variations, which means the transcripts are of different sizes for each gene, and that also affects the kind of expression that a particular gene is giving. And this analysis is also available. Disease biomarker analysis or identification if it is not known. Network analysis, which is slightly tricky and takes a lot of time to explain, so I'm just skipping it. Just this one diagram which shows that different components of, let's say, blood cell types, they interact between each other, and their expressions are then captured, and their interaction between the different cell types is then captured as a network. The other is that we take the plasma metabolome, and how the metabolites increase or decrease is captured, and their interactions are assessed. We can also do a multi-scale analysis, which includes the correlation between the cell type and the plasma metabolite or metabolite correlations. And this can go for any other molecule also. Whole genome analysis is also available. Phylogenetics analysis is available. Phylogenetics is assessment of the lineage of the genes that are present from earlier prehistorical states to the recent state, or even how a particular genome has evolved. For example, we have been able to show this in case of HCV3B, where not such a bright thing, but 3B has originated in India, that we have published. So such analysis can also be done, and the center of origin of these variants can be analyzed. Computational programming, mathematical modeling, and systems biology is also available based on machine learning techniques that have been established. We have also established animal liver disease models, particularly ALD, NAFLD, and some dietary modulations. Strain-specific breeding is also being conducted now. We have also been able to help the animal house in establishing a particular feeding tube for the animals for liquid diet, and this tube is generally not available in the market. So we performed a few experiments to finally come to a conclusion where, without disturbing the animals every time, we can measure the amount of diet consumed and regulate the amount of diet that can be given to the animals. Any questions?